Thank you for having me and for introducing me. I still gonna sort of, because it's not as known in the US how actually provenance research has sort of become an academic exercise in Germany. So in fact, there are now 4 assistant professorships, unfortunately, without tenure track in Germany. Then there is 1 professor with sort of emphasis on provenance research, professor of modern art, and I was the first tenured full professorship solely dedicated to provenance research questions. And it is a Lichtenberg professorship named after Johann Georg Lichtenberg, who was the first scientist in the 18th century in Germany, the first to teach experimental physics at a German university. And it is a endowed professorship by the Volkswagen Foundation, which is sort of like the Mellon Foundation in the US that has like 3 billion or something endowment, totally independent. And what they do, they fund professorships to start new lines of research that don't exist in German universities. And then you can, which was a great privilege, choose the university where you want to do that kind of research. So I chose a university that is sort of young, progressive, because what I'm trying to do is to combine provenance research and data science. And part is because I was entirely socialized in museums doing provenance research for I think the last 12 years. And I also realized how we are not moving forward if we are not using actually the information that we are creating to ask bigger questions and also to just avoid the repetition in research. So that's sort of the background. And what Caitlin already said kindly, my first project is, and some people think I'm crazy, that it focuses on European paintings in US American museums, and it has a very big research question, which is when, why, and how did European paintings end up in US American museum collections? So the idea is to study thousands of objects, or the provenance records of thousands of objects in American museums, Impressionism, Post-Impressionism, and modern paintings, and then sort of very broad still, the impact of political conflicts and transatlantic art market practices on American collecting of modern art, and at a time contemporary art, because the time scope is sort of 1890 till 1960. Network dimensions of transatlantic art market practices, network dimension of US American collecting practices. So we're talking of spatial, temporal, social and conceptual network dimensions. And it is, let's see what we find out, but part is, of course, there's a whole art historical narrative around why I think it is interesting to do that project, but it's also, in a way, an extremely pragmatic decision, because the only Americans that have, the only museums that have been systematic in publishing provenance information online is the American museums, and that as early as 2001. So you have actually the data, because obviously in such a project it's not possible to research every work from scratch, but to use existing data and then to try to see what the data can actually tell us about high tides, prime locations, unusual paths, less usual paths, etc. So that's what I'm up to. And of course, it's also the provenance chain is sort of short when you look in Impressionism and modern center. So it's also, you have a, and it is the best research. So the most knowledge is scholarly, art historical scholarly research is on collectors of Impressionism. It's on collectors of modern art. So it is sort of that we can try to use a new methodology with the existing data and with the existing part. So I picked 3 museums to still sort of why I left the museum world to try this, because the way we record provenance information, and I'm showing 3 museums and how the provenance information is on their website, is as you see it here. It is the Met, the MFA Boston, the NGA Washington. We are we've been using in the US the AAM format that was developed in 2001, but it is a text-based provenance format, and it uses syntax to implement meaning. It's, for example, semicolons means it's a direct transfer, and full stops mean it's an indirect transfer. And the word order sort of tells what each entity means. So is it a location, is it a person, is it etc. But it was not at a time when this format was developed, which was extremely, extremely exemplary that actually the museums at the time agreed on a format. But it was created for human beings. And of course, in all the needs that we have with publications, to sort of how do we bring that massive information so that actually people understand what we are doing. And with these, I could probably do, that is unfortunate that it's all the way down, but the most important thing is that these three paintings actually share a major historical event, but you wouldn't see that. So what I'm emphasizing here is this. And you see Galerie Kahnweiler, you see Hans Wendland, you see Richard Goetz. If you're a provenance expert, you know immediately, oh, World War I, sequestrated by the French government, then it was sold at auction in 1921. But this is not, it is not only that not provenance people see it, it is also for provenance people really hard to identify the works. What were the works that were actually sequestered in World War I at the outbreak in France by German people residing in Germany? So that I can show you these three works is just because I know them. So I find them on the page, or I know the people who were, the Germans who were part of that, and then searching through Google to identify these works on the museum websites. And also the terminology, which is totally screwed up on the screen, but technically here you have sequestered, here you have liquidation sale. Here you have Goetz sale. Here you have in the notes, then if you go further, which we also can't see. But then you have somewhere here sequestered World War I and in the notes. So basically it's the exact same legal situation, it's the exact same legal framework, it's the exact same historical event that caused these ownership changes. But of course, because as we had it with publications, we all use different terminology. And so far, no one has come up with the terminology that actually the data talks to each other. So, and even the brackets and parentheses, I just highlighted. So yellow is the brackets, and then blue is the parentheses. And here you see that everything that has to do with the art market is in parentheses. Additional information like birth dates, etc., is in parentheses. This is in brackets. Then here you have, if it's confusing, then it's also because it is confusing, and because everyone uses it, and it's already extremely great that each of these exemplary museums with the cumbersome and research they put into this, it is consistent, but it's not as consistent across the museums, and it's not sometimes not even consistent within one museum because curatorial departments handle differently. So that was also when I was at MoMA, which doesn't have one format, which has, because there were more people in place, multiple formats over the time, that when I looked at this and decided, so what format are we using at MoMA, part of was looking at this, identifying this, and then it would be recorded like that. So all this research goes then in a free text field, and this free text field uses then HTML code for italics. That also means if you want to change the format, of course, you have to entirely rewrite the provenance for thousands of objects. It's extremely cumbersome. So that is one of the, and I think it's fair to say, frustrations in the field, that that this research then ends up as one could call provenance hygiene, and you're still not able to keep it clean. And there are in TMS, I'm showing you now as another constituent assistance, there is sort of a structure there to theoretically link it. But at the moment when you use these dates, it is like the display date, the begin date of the period of ownership doesn't even allow to record months or days. So you cannot record an auction date. There you can only use years. So that means, by the way the information is recorded, one cannot even ask intelligent questions, although the information is actually there. So to sum this up in a way, and if provenance data is available, it is unstructured. So this means different types of data, usually entered in one field. in fact, the entire biography of an object. So that means various dates, names, locations, method of transfer, notes, books, etc., entered in one text field. So even though you have thousands of objects, you cannot say what were the objects that were in Paris 1930, sold in Paris in 1930. While the research has been done, the information is there. There is no way to make intelligent queries, even within your museum collection. So then it is isolated. So that's sort of the slogan I came up with. The history of art is linked, the data is not. So today technology allows linked data, not TMS yet. Vocabulary is provided by the Getty Research Institute, by Wikidata, of course, etc. It's there, we just need to use it. It is messy. Different terms, syntax, meaning of punctuation, that is all handled differently. It is fussy. Provenance data especially is often, hearsay data. So my father bought this on a summer Friday between 1960 and 1962, which is easy to record to be understood by a human being, but it's not so easy to, or at least one just needs to explain the computer, we mean a day on a Friday, it's between June 21st and September 21st, and it's not a period of time. So this hasn't been figured out, at least not for the provenance, but of course digital humanities moved so quickly that it's sort of time that we get that into the provenance universe. Then it is incomplete, but incomplete is the chains of ownership are more often incomplete than complete. So we speak of gaps in provenance. But the one thing is it's an unknown collection. So you know it wasn't a collection, but you don't know which the collection was. The other thing is you don't know if it was actually a direct transfer or if it wasn't a direct transfer. So it means then it's just a gap of knowledge. And you don't want to say full stop because you don't know if it's a direct or indirect transfer. And it is complex also in the level that in provenance we often deal with uncertainties. So as human beings, we know that possibly is more likely than probably. But that is, again, if you want to do it in a machine readable way, one has to define it. So to sum the situation up, if the data is there, it's not usable, or not usable in the sense for actually asking bigger questions. And this is, I mean, a common phenomenon for any real world data. And the thing is just, and this is I think also what came out now in Katie's talk, that that object documentation and provenance is object documentation, the documentation is at core. So it is not, one can of course just streamline the data and use it for analysis or visualization, etc. But that would stand in conflict to the actual purpose of documenting the information. So part of what I want to do with my international colleagues is, and that's what I budgeted in this research program, is also to agree on a terminology. And even if it doesn't matter if a museum wants to say purchased or sold, as long as it is connected to sale, and we agree this is what sale means. Sale means money was involved. And these kind of things to come up with that allows machine readability, but still listens to the needs of provenance documentation is part of it. And then I hope this would be the exciting part, that in the future, one can actually ask these more interesting questions. And part of is, and this is where I don't even need to talk so much about it, but the complex, right? But it's like provenance research managed. So what I just meant is that you can actually query your collection. What are the works that have gaps? For example, what were the ones that were in Paris, etc. But also identifying works with similar paths. So realizing, okay, there are 10 museums that have a work that has the 3 owners in a row, but one museum has 5 of them. Probably they already went to the archives. Probably they already did the research. But to identify this in an easier way this is why it's important to think in provenance data and not only information. And then there have been exciting projects, and Mapping Titian is a project that was by Jodie Cranston, professor of Renaissance in Boston, visualizing also the Kress collection now. Then Tracing Picasso was a datathon in Munich, and then Art Tracks. just, I do show 2 slides, but it's sort of not on me to talk about it because Katie was part of it, and tech brain, can I call you, like David is moderating the afternoon session. And then data analytics. So I'm referring to one study that was published around the Getty. So just showing you a slide of, this was an in-gallery art tracks pilot. So this is the project that was developed at the Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh. And I probably couldn't have made my case for that professorships if I wouldn't draw upon the experience on these projects. And they also started to, actually the only project I'm aware still that really has looked into structured data, terminology, and how to use it. And the other is the network dimension of the Getty Provenance Index. So this was an article around Christian Hümer at the time from the Getty Research Institute and from Maximilian Schisch, who is a professor for art and technology in Houston. And they looked at, what was it? They looked at 267,000 sales transactions, roughly 22,000 protagonists in 4 countries over 20 years at a daily resolution from 1801 till 1820. And what they did is applying complex network science and then looking for spatial, for temporal, for conceptual, for social. And findings they made was, for example, that, which is the less surprising, that the French auction market is basically Paris, which is, we sort of know from the cultural dominance in countries, but it's very different in Belgium, it's very different in the Netherlands. Then the other thing is socially, most protagonists stay within one region, and also they stick exclusively to buying or selling. And the third one, conceptual, was they were looking for sort of sense-making timeframes of shopping patterns, so which led to the conclusion that a large portion of the European auction market studied was sort of a system that functions like a super slow supermarket on an annual grocery cycle. What that means is annually people apparently buy the same things and only buy some other things. So if you like cucumbers, you buy cucumbers sort of every time you do your groceries, and every now and then you also use carrots. But they also admit with this study, and at the time, Christian told me that actually also problems to find the publisher. They are sort of, I feel they were almost like ahead of their time. And they don't work with object-based provenance information, they work with auction data. So they don't identify the works. And it is, so it's tricky with attributions. So just because the lot says Rembrandt, it doesn't necessarily mean it's Rembrandt if you don't know what exactly the work was. And the other thing, in that study, they didn't integrate the historical context. So what does it mean with political conflicts, custom regulations, etc. So that is sort of where then the project that me and my team will do in Lüneburg sort of have more room to do that. Thank you.